right, it is 2 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get us started here. Welcome everybody to session 2 of 6 of our proposal intensive course. Today we'll be talking about proposal startup. And just a quick housekeeping note, one of our RAC breakout discussion leaders, our fearless leader, Nancy Lonhart, is not with us today, so I have reassigned those breakout folks in that particular breakout room to other rooms. So you'll see some new faces in your breakout rooms. Not a big deal. Just wanted to let you guys know that was happening. So today's learning objectives are to learn how to review a funding opportunity announcement. We talked about that in the last session as being one of the most important documents that you need to complete a proposal. We'll practice building a proposal document checklist. That'll happen in the breakout sessions, and I'll show you kind of how to go about that in the presentation. We'll determine any additional Stanford requirements, just a few of the things you want to look out for in addition to the sponsor requirements as you're preparing a proposal. Learn about how to assign responsibility for collecting specific proposal documents and learn how to format them. And there's a lot to that. So we'll go over the highlights, and then I'm really thrilled that today we have a guest speaker. We have a PI with us. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez Espinosa will be talking to us about her research and how she has benefited from having a department administrator such as ourselves supporting her as she submits external proposals at Stanford. So, all right, so let's get started. First item is funding opportunity review. So I'm going to go through these bullet points, and then I'm going to actually walk you through an NIH funding opportunity to kind of show you what I mean. But as we've talked about before, confirm the specific funding opportunity announcement that for what you're applying for and read it start to finish. Even though some of the sections won't necessarily apply to you, sometimes there are little pieces hidden away that really benefits from just taking some detailed time to read through. What do we want to look for? You want to look for when the opportunity opened up and when it expires. Sometimes a PI will send you an announcement that unfortunately has expired, but maybe it's been reissued under a new funding opportunity that is open, and you just want to make sure you have the correct one. If you download the wrong funding opportunity announcement, you cannot submit it to NIH or any of the other funders. So really got to make sure that's right. For NIH is split out into multiple funding institutes and centers. There's a Cancer Institute and Infectious Diseases Institute. Make sure that the institute that your PI wants to submit to is participating in that funding opportunity. You can look in there to find the budget limitations and also if there are any required budget line items, particularly in collaborative kinds of grants. There often is a line that says the budget must include travel to Washington, D.C. once per year to meet with other investigators. Things like that will be in the funding opportunity announcement. A limit on the number of funding years. Some are for 1, some 2, some 5. Take a look and the funding opportunity will tell you that. Specific document requirements and components. So we'll talk about how most funders have general guidelines that apply to all their applications and then specific funding opportunity guidelines. And of course, the funding opportunity guidelines always supersede the general guidelines. So general, if the funding opportunity doesn't say otherwise, if the funding opportunity does, then you need to go with those, and those will be in those, that'll be in that funding opportunity, what they want you to do. If a letter of intent is required, it will be listed in there, as well as any letters of support. A lot of times an opportunity will have a institutional letter of support that'll be required, maybe for a career applicant or a particular multifaceted center that they want to know there's institutional support for. That'll be listed in there. And then whether or not if a clinical trial is either allowed or required and any other compliance areas that may be involved, all of that will be in there. So I want to actually just show you how you can go into Google and pull up all of these funding opportunity announcements. I'm a big fan of just Googling it fresh. And one of the reasons for that is any changes, you're getting the latest, greatest version of it. So I'm going to put in the NIH parent R01 announcement. For those of you who are not super familiar with NIH and all of the different acronyms that are used, I encourage you, you can actually Google tons of information about NIH, like NIH activity codes. That's what these different R01s, R21s, what they are. And you can actually, the first search result shows you the activity code. Say you were saying, what is Emily talking about with an R01? You can actually just search R01, research project to support a discrete project, right? So you can take a look in there if you wanted to know every possible kind of R activity code, an activity code that began with an R. You can search by R and you see ROO, RO1, RO3, and so on. So lots of information out there. The other place I would direct you is I had shared with everyone all of the RACS training materials. In the overview section, there's an NIH overview. So if you're not super familiar with NIH and how it's structured, there is a great one sheet here that tells you the types of programs. It directs you to the policies and guidelines, some searchable databases that you can use to find more information. So take a look at that, click through on those links. It'll give you the broad overview of NIH and how it works. So, okay, so here's our parent R01. This is our most common grant that any university doing biomedical research will get. You can see that the participating organization is NIH, and then here we talk about all the different institutes and centers that NIH has. This parent R1, most of the centers do participate, but they make the note, not all institutes and centers participate. And so you just want to make sure that if say your PI is a cancer researcher, make sure it says National Cancer Institute, just be on the safe side. So if you scroll down through here, here's the funding opportunity number. And I want to point out, this one says clinical trial not allowed. So again, if your PI starts talking about a clinical trial, then what you want to do is direct them to this PA 2183, which is the clinical trial required. They would need to apply for this funding opportunity instead of the not allowed. When was it open? The open date, the earliest submission date is May 5th, 2020. The application due dates are the standard NIH dates. So if you click through on this, NIH has standard due dates. They go by cycles, cycle 1, 2, and 3 up here on the top. And then by activity code, as we just talked about. So we would look for R01. This is a new R01, a research grant. And so here we are on July 14th. The next deadline would be October 5th. Now I do want to note, if your PI says this is a resubmission of an R01 that I submitted last year, that it scored pretty well, but it didn't get funded, there is a separate deadline for renewal submission revision. It's 1 month later. So then you'd be looking at November 5th. So be sure to take a close look at this chart if you find yourself working on NIH, to make sure you've got the right activity code, the right type of application, and you're in the right cycle. The other thing I want to point out is down at the bottom, it actually shows you kind of the life cycle of a proposal. So you have your application due dates for each cycle, and then scientific merit. That's when the NIH reviews the science to determine the science they'll get together and discuss, and study committee. And then the advisory council is when they actually decide what to fund. So they'll take that information from the scientific review, and then they'll make their decisions based on the scores about what they're going to fund based on their budget. And then this is the other piece of information that you'll need actually at the proposal stage, which is the earliest project start date. So if you know that you're submitting for cycle 3, the earliest start date for you, so this year in 2021, you submit for October 5th deadline. The earliest start date is July 1st of 2022. So it's full 9 months later. So NIH is on a long time horizon on this. So the earliest start date, again, you've got the standard dates there. Here's the expiration date for this funding opportunity. So you see we've got a couple years to go, so we're okay on that. So then they'll have a description here of the funding mechanism, and then it'll let you know what types of applications are allowed. Like, as I mentioned earlier, if your PI says they're doing a resubmission, just make sure resubmissions are allowed. Certain mechanisms are one time, so they can't be renewed. All that information will be there. Clinical trial, not allowed. Make sure you're not planning one. Award budget, this one's quite open, not limited, but need to reflect the actual needs of the project. And the project period is listed here. The maximum project period is 5 years. Now, it is okay to apply for 4 years or 3, but typically PIs generally apply for the full 5. Now, if you scroll down here, here's the information about what goes into the application. And all of these items here, they reference this acronym SF424, Research and Related Guidelines. These are the general NIH guidelines. And so as I talked about before, we default to the general, and then it's superseded by anything specific here that is added. You can see here in all of these cases, all instructions in the application guide must be followed. So for parent R01, it's pretty much what you see in this SF424 is the same. So here's one that has just a little bit of additional instructions, which is regarding the resource sharing plan attachment. Individuals are required to apply comply with the instructions, and the modifications are only limited appendix materials is allowed. Appendix is something you want to be very careful about. Make sure that you check the appendix policy before attaching anything there. Of course, RMG will stop you if you put in something that's not allowable, but a lot of times the PIs need to be reminded of that. So these are the general things that I look for. The only other point I would make is that sometimes it's useful to just do a Control F search and make sure that you've caught everything. Like here's we had the budget line that says it's not limited, but then there's this additional line that requests a $500,000 or more for direct costs in a year. Actually need to contact NIH 6 weeks before submitting to get approval. So this is why I say read that thing start to finish, because there could be something in the funding opportunity that you need to pay closer attention to. The rest of the stuff here is really scientific in nature. There is information at the bottom. If your PI has a question and comes to you and says, who do I contact to ask whether this application might be allowable? It's got the information on the scientific contacts, the R01 IC specific contacts there, the website, and then the financial contacts are here as well. Generally speaking, we would not go directly to NIH. We need to make sure we're working through our institutional officials. We research administrators do not contact NIH directly. However, the PI does have the option of contacting their scientific counterpart at NIH to ask a scientific question. Okay. So now you've read through your funding opportunity announcement. Now it's time to build a proposal checklist. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. I like to get a template checklist as a starting point. I don't stop there, but that's where I start. Now, RMG has several great templates on their website. And again, you can just use Google Stanford RMG checklist templates. It's the first result, tools and templates. And you go here and you can see right here, there's a K proposal, R01, R21 proposal checklist, and includes a sub-award checklist. I also have one saved. It's one in Word format that I particularly like to use. So if you go into those training materials under pre-award management, right here in the first folder is an R01 checklist sample. This is what I tend to work off of. Again, not my endpoint, but definitely my starting point. So I get the funding opportunity announcement, and then I get the general guidelines, and I've got both of them open. And for NIH, it's SF 424, CDMRP, that's for Department of Defense. The foundation, say you're doing Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, they may have their own default guidelines. You need to find out based on the sponsor that you're submitting to. And you create a bullet point for each required document, and then you customize them by adding, if that funding opportunity announcement had something specific in it that they wanted you to include that was in addition to the general, you would add that to your bullet point. And then you go, so then you've customized it for your funding opportunity, and then you go back to the default grant guidelines, the SF24, just to make sure nothing is missed. And I know this seems like, a lot of back and forth, but trust me, you'll be glad you did it, because you'll have peace of mind that you've picked up every stone and looked under each one. And also you will have internalized the guidelines and you'll understand what they say. And then when your PI asks you a question, you'll be like, oh yeah, I saw that in the SF 424. Let me go find that really quick, and then I'll clarify for the PI. The other thing this is really useful for is that when the PI then submits the proposal documents to you, they usually send them to you piecemeal. You'll get 2 or 3 at a time. And then as you get close to the end of the proposal, they'll say, okay, what's missing? What have I not done yet? I'm lost. And so you can use your checklist to track that. You can say received, 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 and then then you can quickly say to your PI, here's what's still outstanding. So here's what mine looks like. I just have the name at the top. I've got the funding opportunity, and I put the hyperlink in so the PI can just click there. I also have the latest general forms. We're on Forms F right now. I have the general formatting requirements, Arial 11 font, 1/2-inch margins, no headers or footers, and then all the required documents. And I've put, if there are any limitations to the length, I've put them there. If there aren't any limitations, there's just nothing at the end. There is a lot of human subjects and clinical trial information. If the PI is proposing that, I do have some info saved in the folders about human subject specific information. If you go to folder 4, templates and resources, I have a lot of information here. I have a human subjects document list that I share with the PI. We as research administrators, we don't have scientific background. We cannot discern between these documents, but we can certainly give the PI resources to help them. So we have that checklist, and we also have the annotated form, the full human subjects form, and it's got all the notes of everything that goes into these attachments. So if they say, I've never done it before, you say, no problem, here's a resource to get you started. Okay. Then additional Stanford requirements, just a few things to look out for in addition to what the sponsor needs. PI waiver, again, we're going to talk about the details of how to generate one of those in session 4. But if you have a non-tenure line faculty or anyone who's in an instructor, postdoc, or research scientist role, they're going to have to get one of these. And the RMG website has a lot of details. Again, if you just do Stanford RMG PI waiver, it's the top result. And you can just click through and get the information that you need. Cost share, we don't want to voluntarily offer cost share, but if it is required, or if there's some reason your PI has that really needs to have cost share, then we have to get approval for a specific account to support that cost share at the university, because cost share is university funded rather than sponsor funded. So you need to get approval in writing, either from the PI if the PI controls the fund, or from the division manager if the division controls the fund, and you have to provide that to RMG. So it's good to get those arrangements going, start asking questions about how that cost share is going to be supported so you can get that to RMG. And then the final thing I would note is, just to determine if any of the co-investigators have limits on their available effort. The PI may say, I want this person on for 20%, but if the person only has 5% to give, then it's good to know that for the budget that you have those flexibilities elsewhere. And the same thing with if they have budget requirements, if they are actually having a postdoc work on it and may need supplies, they may need actually a they may need to say to your PI, I need $80,000 per year on your R01 in order to do my piece of the work. So those things are good to know up front. All right, so once you've got your checklist all worked out, the next question is who's responsible for what? So I always check with the PI to see what they want, but here is kind of commonly how it goes. The biosketches for the co-investigators, usually I, the research administrator, would collect that along with their facilities and equipment. I usually do that in one email. Letters of support, either way, ask the PI. Sometimes they like that personal touch of asking their colleague and saying, what I'd like you to say in this about this research project is, and then go from there. And sometimes they really appreciate getting the help. Subawarded consultant documents, these are usually collected by us or by the RPMs. You want to check with your RPM. I'm working on a proposal. I checked with the RPM last week about the subawards, and she said, I'd really prefer to do that myself. So great, that's good to know up front. Setting up shared file folders. Are you going to collect documents in Medicine Box and Google Drive and Dropbox? Ask the PI. It can go whatever the PI's preferences, and the PI may say, I already have something created, I'll just add you, or they'll say, can you set something up? And then downloading the application package into Assist. Either way, you can ask the PI, really up to their preference. And then, the other note I have in here, proposal document templates also live out on the websites. And actually there are multiple places that you can get that. So if you look in our training materials, there's actually a document that talks about, there's a link to the RMG document templates. There's also Stanford Research Development Office has an NIH template library. The National Institutes on Allergies and Infectious Disease, that's Dr. Fauci's institute. They actually have whole sample applications posted. And summary statements, so you can see kind of how reviewers look at the applications. And then there are fellowship grant proposal resources also on the Biosciences website. So a lot of templates out there to help your PI if they ask for help on specific documents. All right, we're going to get into a couple of things on proposal formatting, and then we'll get to our question answer. So for formatting the proposal documents, you want to review the funding opportunity announcement for these items and note them in the checklist, especially for a foundation announcement. It's all going to just be in that one document usually. But with NIH, actually NIH has their own detailed formatting guidelines. I have this noted at the bottom of the slide, but I'll just go ahead and show you here. NIH format attachments. Again, the top results, it actually extensive information. And so this is a really useful place to go. If your PI says to you, am I allowed to include a URL or can I attach a video? And you don't know off the top of your head, boy, NIH has got all of it covered right here. So the general formatting that you want to, the tips that I want to offer you, Font and margins, make sure these are accurate. Now, why does this matter? Because if if we don't comply with this, the proposal can be administratively withdrawn from review, and it'll never get funded. It'll never even be reviewed. And the reason is, if the research strategy is limited to 12 pages, it's not fair if one person uses 8-point font and the other uses 12, because the person who used 8-point gets a lot more information across to the reviewers, and that's not fair in the review process. Same with the margins. If you make the margins 1/4 inch, you've gotten more science into your application than everybody else, and that's not fair. So it's about fairness in review. That's why we have to have them. If a PI gives me a PDF document, I get the ruler tool and I check and make sure that it's 1/2 inch, because I have seen it happen where a proposal can be administratively withdrawn. Same thing with the figures. Even if the figure cannot go outside the margin either. Text, figures, all of it has to be within the margins. Make sure you're using the sponsor format or templates. Some foundations will have templates that have specialized headers or footers or notations. Just want to check for that and make sure your PI has it. If your document is subdivided, make sure that you have the right subdivisions in place. Like for NIH research strategy, it's organized by significance, innovation, and approach. But maybe the foundation uses 5 subheadings, and maybe your PI is trying to apply to both places, and you just want to make sure the PI knows it's a little bit different. If it's a resubmission, how does the sponsor want you to note the changes? Do they want it in red type? Do they want a black bar on the right side? They'll usually tell you how they want to see that, so make sure your PI has done that. For header and footer, what is the formatting for NIH? No headers and footers, because they're system generated when it's submitted. Subaward upload formatting. When you get your subaward documents, they have to be compliant before merging with the Stanford documents. We have our facilities document, and then we add theirs after it, and then upload them together, but they've both got to be formatted exactly correctly. And then external documents are compliant. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes you'll get a letter of support that somebody just like put on their scanner, and it's in this funky size. It's like, 10 by 12, and you have to have 8.5 by 11, and that will generate a validation error. You won't be able to submit. So just upload that document and validate that proposal and see if it kicks out an error. And if you need to, you can, print it to PDF, get it to shrink to the 8.5 by 11. You can fix it, but you need to identify it first. Okay, last formatting section before we get to Q&A. And this is about biosketches. This is something where we as research administrators can make a big contribution. Because there are a lot of specific formatting requirements. And I've got a link here at the top. The detailed guidance on the NIH biosketch is online. And I go here often. There's a ton of resources. The instructions are here. There are blank format pages. There are samples. There are FAQs, tons and tons of information on how to format these on the NIH website. We are unfortunately in a transition period with our formatting for our biosketches right now. There's an old format that is going to be used through January 24th of 2022, and a new format that beginning the 25th, that's the only format you can use. And we're in the in-between time where actually both are being accepted. So we need to know both formatting types. There are not a ton of differences, but there are some differences. So just wanted to make you familiar, first of all, and if you look on the formatting website, it says due dates on or after January 25th, use these, and then due dates before, there's a whole different set. So want to call your attention to that first thing. We're going to be practicing this in the breakout sessions, doing some biosketch reformatting. We have a new version and an old version, so we'll be doing both. So font has to be Arial 11 on all of these, margins 1/2 inch, same story. The header and footer needs to match the guidelines. For NIH, there is a header on the biosketch only, and it has to be dated 2023. The personal statement should be customized to the specific project. You can see it'll say, I believe my background and skills make me particularly well suited to this application, or something like that. That way you know it's customized. The position, scientific appointments, and honors, just make sure they're in chronological order for the old format and then reverse chronological for the new. Again, this is just a small thing. We can actually reorder these ourselves because they're dated, but it is, a little crazy making if you get into one format and you've got to reformat into the other. The contributions to science section, each of the contributions has to be a 1/2 page or less. You can have no more than 5 total, and no more than 4 publications per contribution. Watch this, because a lot of times folks will have more than 4 publications. And if you don't catch it, RMG will send it back to you and ask you to correct it. The URL to the full bibliography, you want to list that at the bottom of the contributions. If you put it at the top, RMG will make you move it to the bottom. And it's the only URL that's actually allowed in NIH applications. They do not want URLs embedded in the applications. And then finally, research support. Just make sure it's formatted correctly, that you haven't put funding amounts or effort. That's on a different NIH document called other support, and no completed support that's over 3 years old. For the old format, we're going to have a separate section at the end called research support. For the new format coming into force in January, you only list your selected research support that you want to highlight within the personal statement, and the rest of the research support just disappears. So that's a pretty big change. So that one is probably the most surprising to the PIs when you alert them to that fact. So just keep an eye on that.